Winter Cloughjordan in Gaedalchias is mean la ma weekas a goal de father. Agus de Davi asacht an cure tiocht agus fe inur mast. Agus quinn she glunder ma crive e go luder co herach co brivul is a wilshiv. It's such a wonderful pleasure to be in a community that represents the future, that represents possibility, that represents life. And it is so surrounded by all of the values that are the basis of sustainable and real living in our planet. Yes, 20 years ago, I was in Rio. I remember Maurice Strong. I remember he was the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations, who gave status to, if you like, people, you'll never believe it, the Business Council for Sustainable Development. And that was the first time the word sustainable was used practically by many of the government leaders. The Business Council for Sustainable Development was chaired by the General President of Nestle, and it was the Vice Chair was from Fiat Agnelli. I was making a documentary which was eventually shown under 7 Days to Save the World. Because I had become minister, I took myself out of the documentary, and Marcus Ayuda finished the documentary with the questions. It showed us, I think, the contradiction of that time, that while the Business Council for Sustainable Development were sitting at the council as if they were in fact a nation state, many of those who were threatened by global warming, the atolls in the Pacific and others, they were all at a special meeting in the Greenpeace boat, which I attended myself. And I remember attending the social forum. But now I look back over the 20 years, and what I want to say is this, is that it would be wrong to say that nothing was achieved. Some things were achieved. Words entered the discourse, the way that people talked about sustainability, the vulnerability of the planet. And that is very, very important. So I know it's raining, but I want to say that I am very happy to launch the 2012 Convergence Roadshow, and to think that this discourse will go all around the country for a single day. Yes, I am president, and in the different papers that I'm trying to give, I keep on pointing out that I am going to, of course, try and fulfill this role with dignity, but I have also to address it with a sense of urgency. And the reason I have been giving papers in London and in America and other places at the same time as I do my other visits is to say that I think there is an intellectual and moral crisis that is at the root of the crisis that is affecting humanity. That intellectual crisis affects the way we teach subjects like economics, which is sometimes purports to be a science as if it was physics. But I would just ask people, particularly young people, you're looking at the history of science and subjects. Physics was able to change the paradigm of its thinking several times in a generation. At the same time, how is it that economics, rather like a great ship that is not able to turn, is not a science? What it is a set of generalizations, axiomatic principles that have attached to them certain kind of policies that are built on assumptions about human beings. I often look at the youngsters and people of all the different generations. We live, we breathe, we are part of nature, we are part of life, we are born, we will go on and become the substance that will make new life. That is what is important. Our existence as people who have the capacities and the ability to deal with each other and invent all of our subjects anew. But I sometimes think over the last 40 years, there's been an intolerance at times among different people who would otherwise be progressives. I see an enormous correspondence between people who are on the same journey, they are on the same pilgrimage, going the same way. Deep ecologists who have something very similar to what is happening in progressive theology. There are people like Howard Zine and others from the University of Michigan who are critiquing the Chicago School. There are wonderful people who are able to relate to each other passionately and with all of their senses, with the capacity and possibility of living better lives than we are having now. All of that discourse must be made central, and that's why I am pleased to be able to launch something that will go, as I say, on a pilgrimage this year celebrating good ideas for the future that we want. And I think that it is very important as well that it's taking off from here, where already the values that are important are given such a practical expression, both in terms of the materials, in terms of what grows, in terms of the way people live, in terms of the way people listen. I think that there is, and I remain absolutely convinced, of the possibilities that are there among our people. Yes, people will describe crisis. I give you an example. One of them might be in relation to the challenge we are faced in relation to world hunger. If the world population increases from 7 billion to 9 billion, how then should we respond to that? The argument some people will say is we must rush to extend different forms of artificial production to fill that gap. But think of how much better it would be if we listened to and took in the experience of 80% of the women in Africa who work with hoes every day in the field, who actually supply the labour that enables things to come from the dry earth, but who do not own it. These are moral issues, but they're not moral abstract issues as if they belonged in some form of religious belief only. They are practical issues because they are moral issues. And I think that in relation to all that is happening when Rio is being now debated, I certainly will be doing what I can to remind people. 20 years ago, there was a crisis announced in relation that there were maybe 9 or 10 conditions, thresholds which should not be passed if our planet was to be sustainable and was to be safe. At least 3 of these have been sacrificed. But now we move on, and it isn't only a matter of governments. I remember very much when I was making my own programme. It was a nightmare for all the people from the television services of around North America in particular, because the leaders would arrive in their helicopter just as a person had made their piece of film, and it was gone up in smoke. So there were nervous breakdowns everywhere all along outside the conference. But when I spoke to those people and spoke to the people who were involved, it was fascinating in a way. It was as if those who had achieved great positions of power were no longer able to use language that was the language of both the heart and the mind and the body. And what is important in relation to our senses and our living as living beings is the language of the body and the language of the heart and the language of the mind, making something new and visionary, but not abstract. Rather, as I have argued at the University of Limerick and Ernst Becker's work and others, seeing in the prophetic alternative chinks in the possible of what surrounds you, to be able to say, I will be able to do my one small bit with excellence here, and it'll be like taking a stone and you'll be pushing it in a cordon, and gradually we are making our way to the alternative world that we want. It is a great privilege to be here in Cloughjordan. It is something very, very not just symbolic. It is something encouraging and wonderful. Is cuma fuen bostak, dan bostak di chiok dan speir. Ach ta me lan kiente, dan ta ki, ta tovek de wintlich en turmiak. Le act me nieuwe intellectual chasto. It is very, very important that the message be taken of not just of the intellectual crisis, but of all the intellectual and moral possibilities that we want to hear about in schools and community halls and universities and in the media and in serious writing and in conversation, and when people are drinking and when people are talking and when they are doing what is important, celebrating life. Garamila Mahaki, thank you.